Good afternoon, students. You are once more welcome to our biology class. In our last class, we started the topic microorganisms. And from the definition, we say from the word micro, it simply means organisms that are too tiny to be seen by the naked eye because of their sizes. And then in the last class, we also consider some groups of microorganisms. And we looked at about 5 groups. We listed 5 groups of microorganisms. We started with the viruses, we have the bacteria, we have the fungi, we have the protozoa, and we have the algae. These form the 4 groups of organisms that are too tiny to be seen with the naked eye. You need the aid of microscope. And remember we said the microorganisms differ in sizes from one group to another. And last time we were able to look at the viruses and some example of human diseases that are caused by viruses. This afternoon we'll be looking at the second group, which is the bacterial group. And this bacterial group are a group of microorganisms which are unicellular in nature. And remember, when we're grouping organisms based on the number of cells they have, we say we have 2 groups: organisms that are unicellular and organisms that are multicellular. The unicellular organisms are organisms that have single cell, and with that single cell they're able to carry out all their life processes. And bacteria falls under that group. Is a form of microorganism that has a single cell and cannot be seen with a naked eye. Unlike the viruses, bacteria can be viewed with light microscope. They are a bit larger in size compared to the viruses. And then on the board here we have the structure of the bacterial cell. And then on the structure of the bacterial cell on the board, we have the slimy capsule, that's the slimy cell capsule. And then next is the cell wall of the bacteria. The cell wall serves as a protection to protect the inner components of the cell of the bacteria. Next we have the plasma membrane, and then we have the nucleus. The nucleus is the hereditary unit where you have the DNA and the genes that are contained in the bacteria. They are found in the what? In the nucleus. And we know the nucleus is the unit of life in the cell. And then we have the cytoplasmic fluid. Inside the cytoplasm, it is filled with fluids. Then we have these dots in the cells as the ribosome. And you know that ribosomes are sites for production of protein. And you said they are what? They are used for protein synthesis. And then we have the mesosome. And this gives us the structure of the bacterial, typical bacterial cell. Then apart from that, these bacteria are grouped into different groups based on their shapes. Bacteria have different shapes, and they have about 4 major shapes. And the first shape now we have there is the cocci. And singular you call it coccus. The bacteria that fall under this group of cocci are those ones that are round in shape. And then the next one we have is the bacilli. Singular is bacillus. The bacillus bacteria are bacterial cells that have a shape of a rod. And then some of them have flagella. Remember, flagella are whip-like structures that organisms use for movement. So some of the bacteria that form under the shape bacilli have flagella for their movement. The number 3 there is the spirilla, which is called spirillum in singular. And these bacteria are twisted, and they have a corkscrew shape. Like if you look at the cork of the bottle of a soft drink, usually the mouth of the cork is twisted. That is just the spiral in shape. That is the shape of that bacteria. And the last one there we have is the vibral. The vibral bacteria have the shape of a comma. Normal comma as a punctuation mark in English language. And then when we're talking about respiration, we said is the process by which complex food substances are broken down using the oxygen of the air to release energy. These bacteria too can be grouped based on their oxygen requirements as either aerobic bacteria or anaerobic bacteria. Aerobic bacteria are those bacteria that require oxygen for their respiration, while anaerobic bacteria are those bacteria that do not require oxygen for their respiration. That means they can respire in the absence of oxygen. And usually, you know what happens when an organism respires in the absence of oxygen. You have the production of ethanol, which is a form of alcohol. An example of aerobic bacteria are the Microbacterium tuberculosis. That's the bacteria that causes tuberculosis. This is called tuberculosis. And from here, we can now say that tuberculosis is a bacterial disease in human. And also we have Vibral Bacteria. That's the bacteria that cause the normal common disease called cholera. They are all under the Anaerobic Bacteria. They require oxygen for their respiration. And on the equation on the board, you see the normal equation of respiration, where you have your glucose plus the oxygen, and then you have your carbon dioxide, your water, and energy. This is a simple equation of aerobic bacteria, aerobic respiration. Then the next one is example of anaerobic bacteria. These are bacteria that do not require oxygen for their respiration, so they respire in the absence of oxygen. An example, we have Clostridium tetani, that's the normal tetanus bacteria. And then you see here that you only have your glucose because they don't require oxygen for their respiration. You only have glucose, the oxygen is absent. And if an organism breathes in such situations, you're going to have your alcohol, which is the ethanol, then you have the carbon dioxide and the energy. So we have aerobic and anaerobic based on the requirements of oxygen, or when the organism does not require oxygen to respire. Next is to look at examples of diseases caused by bacteria. And in other words, look at examples of bacterial disease. And these bacterial diseases are looking at human bacterial disease. And the first on the board there, the example is the disease gonorrhea. And we know that gonorrhea is an STI, that's a sexually transmitted infection. And this gonorrhea is caused by bacteria. The causative organism is called Neisseria gonorrhoea. That's the name of the particular bacteria that causes gonorrhea. And then most at times you hear people saying gonococcus. That's another name for the bacteria in short form. Then mode of infection. How is this disease transferred from an infected person to a healthy person? Usually it's through sexual intercourse, because we say it's a sexually infected disease. So it's transferred through having sexual intercourse with an infected person. And also we have some rare cases which we have from newborn babies, from the mothers that are already infected. Then location in the host. Which part of the organism is this disease found, this bacteria found when it enters the human body? Is found in the urinary tract, because most at times you find out that, especially in the female, the urinary tract and the genital tract are together. That's why we call it urinary tract. And then you can also see it in the mouth, in the throat, and also in the rectum. These are locations in the host where these bacteria can be found. And then incubation period simply means the period of entry of this bacterium to the period of appearance of symptoms. It takes about 3 to 7 days. In between 3 to 7 days, once an individual is exposed to this bacterium, you begin to see the symptoms. And the symptoms include things. It differs in male and female. Like in the male, you see creamy discharge of pus from the urinary tract, that's the penis, and then you see the burning pain when one is passing out urine. And the individual also suffer from frequent urination. You urinate more frequently. And then in female, we have symptoms like discharge from the vagina. We also have burning pain when the person infected is passing out urine. And then we also have pains in the lower abdomen of the infected person. In advanced or in severe cases, in both male and female, it can lead to sterility. That's the inability of the person to reproduce. And then control. How do we control this gonorrhea? Because we said it's an STD, a sexually transmitted disease. First control there, we have commercialized position must be discouraged, because as long as you keep sleeping with different individuals, you pick the bacteria and then you keep transferring to people that are not infected. And then number two, an infected person should stop having sexual intercourse with the previous partners, because the person had sex with the last one already had the virus. So unless that person is treated, by the time you go back to have sexual intercourse with that person, even after treating yourself, you still get back the virus. Then number three, we have sex education. We have to educate young ones, like what you're doing now, on how these bacteria are passed, Where do they come from? How do we contact it? And then the effect on the individual. And then the second example of bacterial disease there on the board is the cholera, the normal cholera disease. And this cholera disease is caused by a bacterium called Vibral Bacteria. And this Vibral Bacteria is transferred from one person to another through drinking of infected water or milk that has already been contaminated by the bacterium Vibral Bacteria. And you can also get it through eating of foods and vegetables that are already infected. And then we can also be gotten through infection from housefly, especially when we don't keep our food properly. Housefly pick these bacteria from the dump site and also from the restroom, and then when our food are not properly covered, these bacteria find their way into our food, and by the time we eat this food, the bacteria in turn get into us, and then it causes the disease cholera. And then once this bacteria gets into our system, the major target in the body of the host is the small intestine. That is the location in the host where this bacteria is found. So the major organ infected or affected by this bacteria is the small intestine. And then the incubation period is for about 2 to 3 days. In between 2 to 3 days, when you are exposed to this bacterium, the symptoms begin to manifest, which includes severe watery diarrhea. We also have vomiting. We also have abdominal pain. We have dehydration, that is loss of water because of the severe watery diarrhea and the vomiting. So you lost water through the diarrhea and also through the vomiting. It can also lead to unconsciousness and also eventually can lead to death if the patient is not taken care of immediately. So how do we prevent this cholera? From the mode of transmission, we easily deduct the prevention and the control. And then the first one here is that because the disease can eventually lead to death, if the individual is not properly taken care of at the nearest minimum available time, it can also, the first one there is you have to immediately report any suspected person to the nearest hospital. If you have any suspected case, the next thing to do is to take the person, once you notice these symptoms, we take the person to the nearest hospital. And then we can also carry out the simple hygiene method of properly covering our food, keeping our environment clean, and also avoid contaminating sources of drinking water. And for our milk, we make sure that these milk are boiled properly so that the bacteria are killed before we take them in, so that we don't get infected by the cholera bacteria. And then that comes to an end of the lesson, but these are not the only diseases that are caused by bacteria. We have other diseases like the tuberculosis, we have syphilis, they are all under human bacterial diseases. So what I want us to do is that now for our assignments, you are going to discuss 3 other bacterial diseases under this same way we have discussed them: the causative organism, mode of infection, location, incubation period, symptoms, and then how do we prevent it. I've given us tuberculosis, I've given us syphilis, and I've also given us diarrhea as other example of bacterial diseases. So you can look for another one and ask, then you discuss them on this heading. So you do it and then you post it on my WhatsApp page, then we interact. Thank you. Aside bacteria being of harmful effects to humans and to other animals, bacteria is also of benefit to man. Coming from the disease caused by bacteria, which is a harmful effect to man, let's look at the beneficial activities of bacteria. In what aspect of life can bacteria be of importance to man? And we know generally in life, in different aspects of life, bacteria is of importance to man. So we're going to look at this aspect of life, which bacteria are of importance to man. And the first on the board is the soil bacteria. This will imply in the agricultural segment of life. Bacteria is important to humans or beneficial to humans in the agricultural section. In situation whereby you find bacteria that are living in the soil, and these bacteria aid in the composition of remains of plants and animals. fallen leaves and barks of plants that have fallen down, and then animals that have died in the soil are being decomposed by the action of bacteria and are changed into organic humus. And we all know that organic humus is an essential component of organic fertilizer, and organic fertilizer in turn improve yield of plants or crops, thereby also increasing in production of food. And then the second one there is bacteria in the industry. Industry like the tanning, the industry that deals with tanning of leather, that's conversion of hide and skin into leather for making of shoes, bags, belts, and other things that is of importance to man. The removal of the hairs from the skin of the animal is carried out in a tannery, and the process of that removal is what they call tanning. And once that hair is removed, it's being converted into leather that you can use in making your shoes, your bags, your belts, and other things. And then these bacteria aid in the removal of the hairs from the body of the animal, though some chemicals are used in removal of the hairs from the skin of the animal. And then the next one there is the rating of flax. Flax is the raw material for linen and for fibers. And these flax are held together. And then you find out that bacteria enable this, the pectin in this flax to be released, so that we have the fibers that we use in making our linen, that's our clothing. Then number 3, we have curing of tobacco. Bacteria is used to ferment tobacco, and that's why you find that tobacco brings out different flavors from the decomposition of the tobacco by bacteria. And then the next one there we have is in the vinegar making. Yeast, as an example of bacteria, is very essential in production of vinegar. Then the next one there is bacteria in dairy industry. Dairy industry are industries that produce things like milk, cheese, eggs, and the rest of them. So we find out that bacteria play a very essential role in production of butter making, and also in decomposition of or fermentation of cheese. Bacteria also play an importance there. Then the next one there we have number 4 is synthesis of vitamin B complex and vitamin K in the intestine of man. Bacteria are used to produce or to synthesize vitamin B complex and vitamin K to man, which is of importance. Then we also have bacteria that help to digest the cellulose found in the vegetable diet of ruminant animals. Ruminant animals are animals that have 4-chamber stomachs. And this animal, majority of their food is vegetable. So when they eat that vegetable, it contains the component called cellulose. These cellulose are digested by the aid of bacteria. So bacteria aids in the breaking down of cellulose found in the vegetable that the ruminant animal eats. And other importance or benefit of bacteria can also include in sewage treatment. Treatment of dirty water from washing of our clothes and our plates. Bacteria aids in the decomposition of the solid particle of that particular sewage, and then that can also be used as fertilizer. And then we also have bacteria also that aid also in medicine. You can use them as vaccines, whereby the bacteria are made inactive, and then they are introduced into the body of an individual, that the body begins to get used of fighting that disease before it enters natural. That's a natural immunization. So it is used in production of vaccines, also in medicine. These and other more are the beneficial effect of bacteria to man. So before we round up this lesson, in form of summary, we started from bacteria, which is a group of microorganisms. And we say these bacteria are unicellular microscopic organisms. But in size, despite the fact that they are larger than the viruses, but they are also microscopic. And then we look at the harmful effect of the bacteria, so to look at diseases that are caused by bacteria, things like gonorrhea and the rest of them, and then we are looking at the beneficial effect of the bacteria on the body. Thank you.